The unwelcome expert. The Vraxian dreadnought Eternal Vigilance hung in space like a giant obsidian dagger, its crystalline edges refracting starlight into prismatic patterns. Commander Ilara Chen stood at the viewport of her small transport shuttle, studying the alien vessel with professional appreciation. After 15 years as the Earth Fleet's top combat pilot and flight instructor, she thought she'd seen everything the galaxy had to offer. The Vraxians were proving her wrong. Transport EF-117, you are cleared for docking in Bay 4. Follow guidance markers precisely. The voice over the comm had the distinctive harmonic overlay of Vraxian speech, each word delivered with clinical precision. Acknowledged, vigilance control. Following your lead. Ilara replied, then muttered to herself, as if I'd do anything else in this tin can. Her shuttle was a diplomatic transport, not the nimble Thunderbolt fighter she preferred. The Earth Fleet had insisted she arrive in official capacity for this assignment. Teaching advanced combat tactics to the notoriously xenophobic Vraxians was delicate enough without showing up in a human warship. The docking procedure was flawless, too flawless. The guidance system locked onto her shuttle and practically pulled it in, leaving Ilara with nothing to do but watch. Vraxians didn't trust organic piloting for routine operations. Ironic, considering why she was here. As the shuttle settled onto the deck with a gentle thud, Ilara gathered her duffel bag and straightened her charcoal gray Earth Fleet uniform. First impressions mattered, especially when you were the first human many of these aliens would meet in person. The airlock cycled open to reveal a reception committee of 5 Vraxians in their distinctive midnight blue uniforms. Their iridescent scales shifted colors subtly as they moved, a natural feature that made reading their emotions possible if you knew what to look for. Right now, they were displaying various shades of indigo and violet, skepticism and displeasure. The tallest Vraxian stepped forward. Silver markings on his collar identified him as High Commander Terrax, leader of the elite Cygnus Squadron. Commander Chen, he said without offering any Vraxian gesture of greeting. I am High Commander Terrax. Your arrival is acknowledged. Not welcomed, just acknowledged. Ilara forced a smile and offered a crisp Earth Fleet salute instead of extending her hand. Her cultural briefing had been thorough. Vraxians found physical contact with non-Vraxians distasteful. High Commander, thank you for having me aboard the Eternal Vigilance. I look forward to working with Cygnus Squadron. Terrax's scales shifted to a deeper purple. Your presence was requested by Confederacy High Command, not by me. I find the implication that my pilots require human instruction to be questionable. Direct. At least, Ilara could work with direct. No implication intended, High Commander. The alliance between Earth and the Vraxian Confederacy is still new. Knowledge exchange benefits both our civilizations. Your pilots are legendary for their precision. My role is to offer a different perspective, not to suggest superiority. Another Vraxian, with the markings of a flight lieutenant, spoke up. Different how? Vraxian neural architecture allows us to process spatial calculations 3 times faster than human brains. Our pilots train from hatching. What could humans possibly teach us about space combat? Ilara turned her attention to the lieutenant, noting the bright edges of his scales. Curiosity mixed with the skepticism. Lieutenant Zavik. Flight Lieutenant Zavik. Lieutenant Zavik, you're absolutely right about Vraxian neural capabilities. You process spatial mathematics faster than any human could hope to. But space combat isn't just about calculations. Sometimes, the mathematically perfect maneuver is also the perfectly predictable one. Terrax made a sound that Ilara's translator didn't catch. Some kind of Vraxian equivalent of a derisive snort, she guessed. The Kravashi swarms have been attacking Vraxian outposts for decades, Terrax said. We've defended successfully using our tactical doctrines. The recent losses that prompted this cultural exchange were anomalies. 5 colonial outposts destroyed and thousands of Vraxian lives lost were quite the anomalies, but Ilara kept that thought to herself. Perhaps we should continue this discussion after Commander Chen has been shown to her quarters, suggested a female Vraxian with science division markings. The human must be experiencing fatigue after the journey. I appreciate the consideration, Ilara said, but I'd prefer to see your flight deck and meet the squadron if possible. Best way to understand what I'm working with. Tirax's scales flashed briefly to crimson before settling back to purple. Very well. Follow me. The Cygnus Squadron flight deck was impressive. A vast chamber housing 24 Vraxian Starstrikers, the most advanced interceptors in the Confederacy fleet. The ships were beautiful, with their crystalline navigation arrays and biomimetic hulls that could reconfigure slightly during flight for optimal aerodynamics. 16 Vraxian pilots stood in formation, their scales uniformly set to the professional blue of active duty. They regarded Ilara with expressions ranging from curiosity to unconcealed disdain. Pilots of Cygnus Squadron, Tirax announced, "This is Commander Ilara Chen of Earth Fleet. By order of Confederacy High Command, she will be observing our training procedures and offering alternative tactical perspectives." The emphasis on alternative wasn't subtle. Ilara stepped forward. "It's an honor to meet the finest combat unit in the Vraxian Confederacy. I've studied your engagement records against the Kreveshi. Your precision and coordination are unmatched in the known galaxy." This was true, and flattery never hurt, but she needed to establish credibility quickly. "However," she continued, "the Kreveshi have adapted to your tactics. Their new high ships are specifically designed to counter Vraxian attack patterns. That's why I'm here, not because your methods are flawed, but because sometimes the unexpected is the strongest weapon we have." A murmur ran through the assembled pilots. Lieutenant Zivic's scales flashed with bright blue highlights. He was intrigued, unlike most of his squad mates. "Theory is easy," said one of the pilots. "Any organic can claim superior methods." "Demonstration, then," Ilara suggested, turning to Tirax. "With your permission, High Commander, I'd like to fly one of your Starstrikers through a combat simulation. Your pilots can program the scenario. Make it as difficult as you like." Tirax's scales cycled through several colors before settling on a reluctant blue-green. "Starstrikers are neural-linked to Vraxian physiology. You would be unable to." "Actually," interrupted a Vraxian engineer standing nearby, "the Mark IV units have universal interface options. They were designed with potential alien allies in mind, though they've never been tested with humans." "There's your answer," Ilara said with a smile. "I'll be your test case." After 20 minutes of technical preparations and safety protocols, Ilara found herself in the cockpit of Starstriker Cygnus 07. The interface was alien, but the principles were universal: thrust, vector, weapon systems. The neural link wouldn't function for her, but the manual controls were sufficient. "Simulation parameters set," came Zevic's voice over the comm. "Kreveshi ambush scenario. Difficulty level maximum. 3 high ships with drone swarms at Sector 7. Standard Vraxian squadron casualties in this scenario. 60%. "Understood," Ilara replied, feeling the ship come alive around her. Beginning run. What followed left the watching Vraxians in stunned silence. Ilara flew the Starstriker in ways its designers had never imagined. Where Vraxian pilots would execute perfect attack vectors, she deliberately introduced variations. Jerky, unpredictable movements that the simulation's AI couldn't anticipate. She barrel rolled through drone formations, used the high ship's own gravity wells to slingshot her fighter at impossible angles, and at one point cut her engines entirely to drift past enemy sensors before reigniting with a burst that brought her directly behind the command node. When she finally landed the Starstriker back on the deck, the simulation showed all 3 high ships destroyed, with only minor damage to her fighter. Ilara climbed out of the cockpit to find the Vraxians staring at her, their scales cycling through colors she hadn't seen before. Confusion, disbelief, and from Zavik, a bright, admiring turquoise. That was. Tirax seemed at a loss for words. irregular, illogical. You deliberately introduced inefficiencies into your flight pattern. I introduced unpredictability, Ilara corrected. The Kreveshi hive mind anticipates patterns. Their entire evolution is based on recognizing and exploiting patterns. Perfect flying creates perfect patterns. But your maneuvers violated optimal engagement protocols, insisted another pilot. You burned excess fuel, exposed your ship to unnecessary structural stress, and survived. Ilara finished. With a functional ship and 3 dead high ships, results matter more than method in combat. Zavik stepped forward, his scales now pulsing with vibrant blues and greens. I want to learn, he announced, surprising his squad mates. The techniques are unorthodox, but effective. High Commander, permission to be first in the humans' training rotation. Terax's scales settled into a thoughtful indigo. You've made your point, Commander Chen. I remain skeptical, but I cannot argue with the simulation results. Training will begin tomorrow's cycle. Lieutenant Zavik, you have your permission. As the Vraxians dispersed, Ilara caught Zavik lingering behind. Commander, he said quietly, the others will be difficult to convince. Our neural architecture predisposes us to seek optimal solutions. Deliberate suboptimization feels wrong. Ilara nodded. I understand. But sometimes, Lieutenant, the perfect solution is the wrong one. The Kreveshi know how Vraxians think. They've been fighting you for generations. They don't know how humans think. And how do humans think? Zavik asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Ilara smiled, messily, intuitively. We use math and logic, but we also use instinct and gut feelings. We improvise. And sometimes that's exactly what you need when the perfect plan falls apart. Zavik's scales shimmered with thoughtful blue. The High Commander has authorized 2 standard cycles for your training program. That's very little time to change thinking established over centuries. Then we'd better not waste a minute, Ilara replied. Because the reports I've seen suggest the Kreveshi are planning something big, and soon. Your squadron needs every advantage it can get. As if answering her warning, the Dreadnought's alert system suddenly blared to life. All pilots to stations, came the announcement. Kreveshi signatures detected at the edge of the Lyranth system. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Zavik's scales flashed to combat red. It seems, Commander, that your training will be more practical than theoretical. Ilara nodded grimly. Looks that way. Let's hope your squad mates are quick learners. Trial by fire. The flight deck of the Eternal Vigilance transformed into organized chaos as pilots rushed to their Star Strikers. Commander Ilara Chen stood to the side, watching the precision of the Vraxian pre-flight procedures with professional admiration despite the circumstances. High Commander Terax approached her, scales now set to the deep crimson of battle readiness. You will observe from the command center, he stated, not a request, but an order. With respect, High Commander, I'd be more valuable than a fighter, Ilara countered. This is exactly the scenario I was brought here to help with. You have no formal place in our squadron structure, Commander. Our neural link combat coordination wouldn't include you. Lieutenant Zavik interrupted, his voice urgent. High Commander, preliminary scans show 5 Kreveshi high ships approaching Lyranth colony. That's more than we've ever faced simultaneously. Terax's scales flickered with momentary uncertainty. 5 high ships was unprecedented, a force large enough to overwhelm even Cygnus Squadron's perfect formations. The human pilot destroyed 3 high ships in simulation, Zavik added, his scales edged with the bright blue of inspiration. Perhaps. Terax hesitated only briefly. Very well. Commander Chen, you may fly Starstriker 07 since you're already familiarized with its systems. You will operate independently, outside our neural-linked formations. Understood, Ilara replied, already moving toward the fighter she'd used in the simulation. Commander, Zavik called after her. Our squadron's tactical neural link won't integrate with your systems, but I've adjusted your comm to monitor our coordination channel. You'll at least hear our movements." Ilara nodded gratefully. "I'll make it work." Within minutes, the sleek Vraxian fighters launched in perfect sequence, forming up in their signature trident formation as they accelerated toward the Lyranth system. Ilara followed in Starstriker 07, maintaining position just outside their formal structure. "Cygnus Squadron, this is High Commander Terrax. Long-range scans confirm 5 Krivishi hive ships approaching Lyranth colony. Standard engagement pattern Delta 9. Our primary objective is colonial defense." "Commander Chen," Zavik's voice came through on a private channel. "Lyranth colony has 15,000 civilian Vraxians. It's a scientific research outpost, lightly defended." "Understood," Ilara replied. "I'll follow your squadron's lead, but I may break off if I see an opportunity." "The High Commander won't appreciate freelancing," Zavik warned. "Let me worry about that. Just keep your eyes open. You might see things today that contradict everything you've been taught." The Kriveshi fleet came into visual range as they entered the Lyranth system. 5 massive hive ships surrounded by clouds of smaller drone fighters. Each hive ship resembled a giant metallic insect with spindly appendages and a segmented structure that could reconfigure during battle. The drone swarms moved with the uncanny coordination of a single mind, which essentially they were, extensions of the hive commander's consciousness. "All fighters, execute attack pattern Delta 9, ordered Terrax." The Vraxian squadron split into 3 perfect formations, approaching the Kriveshi fleet from predetermined vectors calculated for maximum weapons efficiency. It was mathematically beautiful, Ilara had to admit, and entirely predictable. She watched with growing concern as the Kriveshi drone swarms began shifting in response, countering the Vraxian approach with uncanny precision. "They've seen this before," she muttered, then keyed her comm. "High Commander, they're anticipating Delta 9. The drone formations are already positioning to counter." "Maintain formation," came Terrax's curt reply. Ilara swore under her breath as she watched the perfect Vraxian attack pattern fly directly into the Kriveshi counter-strategy. The result was immediate and devastating. Drone swarms enveloped the first Vraxian flight group, focusing fire on the formation leaders. "Starstriker 03 is hit. Shields failing," came a panicked report. "Maintain formation integrity," Terrax commanded, but his voice held an edge of uncertainty now. Ilara had seen enough. "I'm breaking off," she announced, banking her fighter hard away from the main engagement. "Zavik, if anyone wants to try something different, have them follow me." Without waiting for a response, she pushed her Starstriker into a steep dive beneath the plane of the battle, then cut power momentarily to drift silently before igniting thrusters in a burst that sent her fighter rocketing toward the underside of the nearest hive ship. The move was so unexpected, so contrary to Vraxian combat doctrine, that the Kriveshi defenses didn't register her approach until she was already firing. Her weapon struck a vulnerable junction where the hive ship's segments connected, causing cascading damage through its structural integrity. "All fighters, status report," Terrax demanded over the squadron channel. "4 fighters damaged, 1 destroyed," came the response. "Standard formation compromised." Ilara keyed her comm again. "The formations aren't working, High Commander. The Kriveshi have adapted. Permission to try something unorthodox." There was a moment of silence as Terrax presumably weighed his options. Then, "What do you propose, Commander Chen?" "Break your squadron into pairs. Irregular movements, no standard patterns. Target the hive ship's junction points between segments. I've detected structural vulnerabilities there." Another pause, then. "Proceed. Anyone who wants to follow my lead, form up loosely, and I mean loosely, on my position." Ilara called out. "Pairs, not formations. Keep your movements unpredictable." To her surprise, not only did Zavik's fighter break away to join her, but 4 other Vraxian pilots followed suit. "What now, Commander?" Zavik asked, his voice tight with tension but scales flickering with trust. "Now we dance," Ilara replied, pushing her fighter into a spinning roll that no Vraxian would ever consider tactically viable. "Follow my general trajectory, but add your own variations. Don't fly straight, ever. Make the Kreveshi guess." What followed was unlike any battle in Vraxian combat history. While Terrax maintained a smaller, tighter formation with the remaining squadron members, Ilara led her improvised group in what appeared to be chaos, but was actually controlled unpredictability. They approached the high ships from constantly changing vectors, fired in irregular bursts rather than calculated volleys, and used the Krevashi's own drone swarms as cover by flying through them in erratic patterns. "This is madness," came the voice of one Vraxian pilot, but he was laughing, a sound rarely heard in Vraxian combat communications. "It's working," Zavik reported as the second high ship began breaking apart under their unconventional assault. "Their predictive algorithms can't anticipate our movements." Ilara pushed her Star Striker into a tight spiral around a drone cluster, using their own defensive fire to catch other drones in the crossfire. "They're designed to counter patterns," she called out. "So we give them none." Even Terrax began to adapt, breaking his formation into smaller, less predictable units that mimicked some of Ilara's techniques while maintaining Vraxian precision. The combined approach created confusion in the Kreveshi hive mind, which relied on recognizing and countering standardized tactics. An hour into the battle, 3 high ships were destroyed, and the remaining 2 began a retreat maneuver. "They're running," Zavik announced, his voice filled with disbelief. "I've never seen Kreveshi retreat." "Because they've never needed to," Ilara replied. "Until now, they could predict exactly how you'd fight." "Pursuit Formation Alpha 2, ordered Terrax. "High Commander," Ilara interrupted, with respect, "if we return to standard formations, we lose our advantage. Let's maintain unpredictability through the pursuit." There was only a brief hesitation before Terrax responded. "Acknowledged, Commander Chen. All fighters maintain current tactical approach during pursuit." The remaining Kreveshi hive ships never stood a chance. Without the ability to predict Vraxian movements, their defensive algorithms failed repeatedly. The Vraxian pilots, emboldened by their success, pushed their improvisational flying even further. By the time the last hive ship exploded in a spectacular burst of energy, even the most skeptical Vraxians were executing maneuvers they would have considered heretical just hours before. As the squadron returned to the eternal vigilance, the comm channels buzzed with excited discussion. Vraxian neural architecture might favor precision and calculation, but these pilots had just discovered something their training had never revealed: the joy of intuitive flying. The landing deck was crowded when Ilara climbed out of her Star Striker. Vraxian pilots gathered around, scales displaying a kaleidoscope of colors she'd never seen in combination before. The blues of intellectual stimulation mixed with the reds of combat excitement and golds of accomplishment. High Commander Terrax approached. His scales settled into a formal blue with gold edges. "Commander Chen," he said, his harmonic voice carrying across the suddenly quiet deck. "Your tactics were—" He paused, seemingly searching for the right word. "Chaotic." Ilara braced herself for criticism. "And absolutely effective," Terrax finished. "You've given us much to consider." "What happens now?" Ilara asked. "Now," Terrax replied, "we synthesize. Vraxian precision combined with human unpredictability. A new combat doctrine that preserves our strengths while incorporating yours." Lieutenant Zavik stepped forward, his scales bright with enthusiasm. "The mathematics of chaos," he suggested. "Deliberate unpredictability within calculated parameters." "The Kreveshi won't know what hit them," another pilot added. Terrax's scales shifted to the formal purple of official declaration. "Commander Ilara Chen, the Cygnus Squadron acknowledges your contribution to today's victory. Your full training program is now authorized without reservation." Ilara smiled. "Thank you, High Commander. But I think we've already begun the most important lesson. Sometimes the perfect solution is imperfection. As the Vraxian pilots dispersed, still discussing the battle with uncharacteristic animation, Zavik remained behind. "You've changed things," he said quietly. "Not just our tactics, but how we think about space combat. Some will resist. Change is never easy," Ilara agreed. "But your people adapt when the evidence is clear. Today proved that combining our approaches makes both stronger." "There is an old Vraxian saying," Zavik offered, his scales shifting to thoughtful blue. "The crystal that never bends eventually shatters. Perhaps we have become too rigid in our thinking." Ilara nodded. "And humans sometimes bend too easily, lacking the structure that gives your methods their power. We have much to learn from each other." "The Confederacy High Command will want a full analysis of today's engagement," Zavik said. "This could change space combat doctrine throughout the Alliance." "One battle at a time, Lieutenant," Ilara replied with a smile. "We still have a training program to complete." "After today," Zavik said, his scales displaying the bright confidence of certainty, "you'll find your students considerably more attentive." As they walked together from the flight deck, Ilara couldn't help but feel that something profound had shifted today. Not just in Vraxian combat tactics, but in the relationship between their species. Precision and chaos, calculation and intuition, alien and human perspectives, merging to create something neither could achieve alone. The Krivishi wouldn't know what hit them, and neither would the galaxy.